John Gilpin was a citizen of credit and renown. Train band captain, else was he, of famous London town. That's one of those chestnut poems that school children in England have to learn by William Cowper or Cowper. One of my favorite poets. How does one categorize him? Was he one of the greats like Shakespeare, Goethe, Wordsworth? I don't think one can say that. He was certainly, though, wasn't a minor poet. He enchants in some of his poems by a certain humility, but he could write great hymns. He could make astounding prophecies. I'll refer to these later. But I'm not here to give a general lecture at a university about William Cowper, but to share with you some of my thoughts about his verses. I'll quote some, and what they mean to me, and why they mean so much. He was a so-called Augustan poet, belonging to the school to which Alexander Pope, for example, also belonged, who extolled the great virtues of classical literature at the time of Virgil and Horace. In terms of religion, he was an evangelical, close friend of the Reverend Newton, who wrote that famous hymn, Amazing Grace. A man with a great heart for humanity. One who was afflicted, though, by a terrible depression. He believed that he was bound for hell, although, as far as I can see, he was one of the least eligible for such a fate, as many of his poems attest to his love of animals and the humble things of life. So let's begin then with a reading of some of his verses and perhaps a consideration of why they are relevant today. I sing the sofa, I who lately sang truth, hope, and charity, and touched with awe the solemn chords, and with a trembling hand escape from pain, from that adventurous flight. Now seek repose upon a humbler theme, the theme, though humble, yet august and proud, the occasion for the fair commands the song. But a sofa, a piece of common furniture, seems hardly worthy to be the theme of a lofty epic. But Cowper consciously reduced or downscaled his theme to a domestic scene. The Task is a long, almost epic-length poem containing 6 books, the first of which is entitled The Sofa, and the lines just read are the introduction to that book, in the lofty style with which the poets of old addressed their muse. Thus, in this poem, hissing kettles and the clapper of teacups has as much a place as lofty thoughts concerning the higher virtues. And in the poem, descriptions of walks and the mention of common events of life are intermingled with flights of thought about philosophical subjects, often prompted by something the poet has seen. In one of his contemplations concerning the nature of freedom, the poet becomes prophetic as he expresses a sincere wish for the fall of the Bastille several years before the event in fact took place. I quote a passage from the 5th book of the Task, entitled The Winter Morning Walk. The first lines I quote convey a thought which Voltaire also expressed, whose freedom is by sufferance and at will of a superior, he is never free. Who lives and is not weary of a life exposed to manacles deserves them well. But slaves that once conceive the glowing thought of freedom, in that hope itself possess all that the contest calls for, spirit, strength, the scorn of danger, the united hearts, the surest presage of the good they seek. Then shame to manhood and the opprobrious more to France than all her losses and defeats, old or of later date, by sea or land, her house of bondage worse than that of old, which God avenged on Pharaoh, the Bastille. Ye horrid towers, the abode of broken hearts, ye dungeons and ye cages of despair, that monarchs have supplied from age to age, with music such as suits their sovereign ears, the sighs and groans of miserable men. There's not an English heart that would not leap to hear that ye were fallen at last, to know that even our enemies, so oft employed in forging chains for us, themselves were free. For he that values liberty confines his zeal, for her predominance within no narrow bounds. Her cause engages him, wherever pleaded, 'tis the cause of man. In some way very strange that the same figure, the same person, Alexander Selkirk, should inspire Defoe to think of a hero who would prove active and not accept the fate of isolation, and that this figure should instill into William Cowper's mind a terrible fear of isolation, almost a kind of solipsistic dread. And this isolation, this fear, unfortunately remained with William Cowper until he wrote his very last poem called The Castaway, in which he sees himself as one totally overwhelmed. It seems he was suffering from some kind of autistic or deep depressive feeling, but surely his consolation must be that he wrote poetry that is so enchanting, so full of wisdom, so amusing, so deep, that he has with him a great company of those who have enjoyed and appreciated his poetry, and those who still do so and will do so as long as there's an English language and there's English poetry to read. So with that upbeat thought, I will leave you as I pay this homage to a truly great and loved poet, William Cowper.